Good morning, everyone. It is 7:45 as we sit in morning peak hour traffic on our way to Sydney Airport. Today, we're flying in economy on Cathay Pacific's Boeing 777 to Hong Kong. We seem to be skipping traffic in the transit lane, but in typical Sydney fashion, we come to a standstill as our path into the harbour tunnel is blocked by yet another overhyped truck. It's almost the last square on my bingo card for the year after road toll increases, silly infrastructure proposals, train strikes, over-budget projects, delayed everythings, and a few others, which, with my travels during the year, puts me in dead last against the rest of the Sydney population. The traffic was unexpected but honestly not surprising considering the low intelligence and lack of common sense across some of Sydney's finest drivers. Like these cars queuing past the massive overhead stop sign and a truck driver incapable of reading or counting, yet still somehow safer than most other road users. It's a long detour to the airport, and although I would usually be more frustrated, I'm fine today as it knocks time off the clock waiting at the gate since we don't have lounge access flying in economy. Cathay Pacific sets up at check-in counter G and requires economy passengers to attach tags by themselves. There are only a handful of these kiosks, so if you arrive late, it does get busy. Even this queue for bag drop took over 5 minutes, and you bet I'm not impressed by the post-COVID transfer of extra work onto the passenger. Sydney is constructing a second airport with much needed reason as I spent almost 20 minutes waiting for immigration and customs. Again, premium cabin passengers have their own dedicated express lanes which we couldn't use this time, although it wasn't any faster than the main queue today. It was about half an hour until scheduled boarding when I do finally get through customs, so I wander to the gate, scout the plane, and take a seat. Most Cathay flights board a bit later, but today was way behind schedule as I was still not so happily seated coming up to 11 AM, and only boarded the plane after the hour mark. It is worth noting this was a super full flight, so I'll be a bit more lenient here. I'm in the very first row of economy class in seat 39A. Upon seating, I see my 11.6-inch touchscreen, unsurprisingly out of comfortable arm's reach on the bulkhead. The seat pocket includes a magazine, sick bags, safety card, and headphones, which is probably the only item of interest. It comes like this, but I'll explain more later. More legroom might be misleading, as while there isn't a seat ahead, you can't stretch your legs under the wall like you would under a seat. It's more spacious around the knees, but a comfortable stretch for anyone over 5'8" would be difficult when buckled in. There's a blanket on my seat which I unwrap, and I'm rather surprised. The label says it's over 1.5 years old and the polyester is wearing, which I'm not too fussed with, until I unfold it and find these stains and hair all over it. Cathay, pick up your game. We're handed menus which I have a quick glance over. My decisions are straightforward without hesitation. Fish on flights is a big no, so I take the pork for lunch. Add noodles over a sandwich before landing seems highly logical too. Anyway, we're running very late as the last checks are done and we finally pull away from the gate after a long wait. It didn't stop there as we came out into traffic, and after watching a few landings and takeoffs, it was our turn on the runway. These planes were behind us the whole time we waited, and I could see planes lining up to land in the sky, so it would have been an even longer wait for them as we left the ground almost an hour behind schedule. The flight paths are new to what I remember as we fly over Sydney's most rage-inducing patience testing roundabout. If you know, you know. There's also the Olympic Park, Rose Hill Racecourse, and Western Sydney Stadium. Peanuts and a drink are served once we reach altitude, and I go for my trusty water. As common with most airlines these days, it's all about sustainability, hence the paper cup. More time passes before the first meal, which lets me explain why fish is a big no on flights in a sec. Anyway, this is lunch, and while I used to be surprised by metal cutlery in economy, it's now the industry standard to reduce waste. We had to wait a minute or two for the bread, which came late. When it did come, it was unusually colder than the butter, which makes me question why it came late in the first place. It's nicely soft and very slightly moist, but I'm not sure why it wasn't heated up. The couscous came with a plastic lid, which again, I found pretty cool. The smoked chicken is delicious and the soft pumpkin isn't too dry, as can happen with some carriers. So far, it's a solid start. Now to the pork, and the first thing I notice is the size. While the container is already this small and the food used to be packed in, the visual volume seems to have decreased, but that's just my opinion. The rice is fine, but the pork and vegetables are properly overcooked. When I was eating, I actually wrote down a note for later asking myself whether economy food was like this on purpose to entice customers to upgrade for a premium cabin, which is all you need to know about my thoughts on the pork. If you think about how tough this pork looks, it's the exact reason why I never go for fish on a flight. Thoughts and prayers for my seat neighbor who chose the fish, then didn't eat it, probably because chewing rubber might have been significantly cheaper. Obviously, I finished mine because I still believe food shouldn't be wasted. As I continue my staring contest with the clouds, I also tuck into the Ben & Jerry's chocolate ice cream for dessert. It's a bit sweet for my liking, but since I'm more bitter than the Grinch, I'm sure it'll be highly enjoyed by most others. There's Bega cheese and Arnott's crackers to finish off, which if you're a highly disciplined person like me, might need to ignore instructions to open the package. The cheese is understandably greasy, but I'm not too fussed when it comes to processed and packaged cheeses. It's still good for its standard, and other than the bread and the pork, I don't have any more big thoughts or opinions on this meal. Time for the seat, and while there's no bulkhead stowage for takeoff and landing, there's a baby table which pulls out. It can hold 12 kilograms, or my seat neighbor's handbag, which I suspect would have been unusually close to this amount. As I have the window seat, I left the armrest alone. Although they did also take 10% of my seat by force when the lights dimmed, but that's another story. And before you ask, no, we don't know each other. The tray table and IFE remote stalls in the armrest, and I naturally used this rather than leaning forward for the touchscreen. The recline is acceptable and the headrest bends to fit your needs, although the vertical movement on my seat was loose and it kept dropping unnecessarily. There's also a pillow which is very soft, and again a few stains which I was surprised and disappointed about. The tray table folds out into a half or full size, and it's smartly designed with a cup holder and mobile device holder in both layouts. There's a very grippy section with indented grooves so your device doesn't slide off, which I think is the best part of the refurbished economy seat design. There's more small stowage under the screen with USB and audio ports, although it's a bit useless in the first row since it's more than an arm's reach away. This is the cabin as we head to the toilet. 39 is the only row with a 2-seat layout in economy. The bulkhead means there's no need to intimately climb over anyone or ask them to move, and it's one less person for the window seat passenger to navigate, hence my seat selection at the expense of some legroom. The toilets were not really maintained throughout the flight, as you can see. It wasn't the best economy toilet I've used, but I've been in worse. You'll see in a later video. It has all the features you'd expect, although no drawers for any sort of toiletries, which is even weirder considering CX doesn't provide amenity kits for economy on this flight. These are the headphones which don't help with any sort of noise cancellation, so I suggest you bring your own. It can connect to the jack under the screen or next to the remote in your armrest for a bulkhead seat. The 777 IFE doesn't seem to like me as it's the third consecutive Cathay flight to test my patience. If patience runs short, food is always a good answer. I'm distracted by the plastic lids again, but it looked good and had the taste to match. As with plain food, it's visibly oily, but this is something I only note and won't actively criticize regardless of which flight cabin I'm in. There's watermelon, apple, and rock melon followed by an apple lumberjack cake. This one was artificially sweet as with most plain desserts, and therefore I didn't enjoy as much. Again, I go for water, and that's both meals out of the way. As we enjoy the sunset, I'll share some critical thoughts on this flight experience. A question on my mind I've said before and I'll say again, especially after this flight, I do have some queries as to whether airlines purposely diminish the economy class experience to entice a premium cabin ticket purchase. It wouldn't make sense since there are so many competitors in the market flying identical routes, but annihilating the pork in a nuclear reactor really tipped me over the edge with this as it's such an easy fix. Quality control over something like a blanket would be a huge upgrade, and combined with the lunch, having two things go wrong on a Cathay Pacific flight really shouldn't be happening, not mentioning the delay. As I've mentioned in previous videos, the Cathay flight experience isn't as premium as it used to be, likely due to reducing expenditure, which would also explain the lack of amenity kit and in-flight toiletries without requesting it specifically. It's a concerning trend as I've seen fellow travelers reporting a similar pattern, so hopefully the incoming cabin upgrades will also include service at the standard CX used to be so reputable for. We land after dusk and taxi for an eternity until we arrive at gate 1, pulling in next to a Qantas flight from Sydney which left 10 minutes after us. It's also a shame our flight arrived 45 minutes late while Qantas made up time in the air, overtaking us in the process. We disembark reasonably quickly, and it's the shortest possible walk to immigration, which is still slightly busier this evening. However, we're at baggage claim 2 for some reason, forcing all of us to walk the length of the airport to the other side of where we landed. It's a bit of a silly decision when it could be relocated to our gate's side of the airport. It's even sillier not to have a number 1 belt, but please write in the comments if you know why, because I don't. We waited for close to half an hour, but once I picked up my bags, it was a smooth run onto the Airport Express and into the city centre from there. Again, I can't stress the importance of a good airport transit connection, and Hong Kong is probably the best of them all. Although I don't have an outro, I do have an appreciation for cool art installations.